for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. We have to talk about the missing Titanic tourist submersible. We have an update to that. We also have to talk about Donald Trump. We have a brand new episode of As Ottawa County Turns. We have a double hammer time segment and an off-the-cuff segment. A lot of stories to get to. And let's go ahead and start by telling you how you can follow Southpaws on social media. On Facebook at Southpaws Radio Show. On Twitter at Southpaws Radio. On Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. On YouTube and Mastodon, all you have to do is search for Southpaws Radio. To become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern, and you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. So I'm sure some of you are asking, Darren, how can you politicize the Titan submersible? Well, if anybody can, it's going to be me. Let's get to the latest update. This is Eric Bazale-Emil writing for Politico.com. This is dated June 22nd. This was updated at 3:35 Eastern Time. We are recording this show on June 22nd. Experts have assessed that the debris field found on the ocean floor near the Titanic shipwreck came from the body of a missing tourist submersible that disappeared Sunday. Coast Guard officials confirmed on Thursday that all 5 people aboard are now believed dead. Rear Admiral John Mauger, the head of the search and rescue operations, said at a news conference in Boston Thursday afternoon, quote, "The debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. On behalf of the United States Coast Guard and the entire Unified Command, I offer my deepest condolences to the families." End of quote. At 1 p.m. Eastern Thursday, the Coast Guard had announced that a remotely operated vehicle found a debris field near the Titanic shipwreck, but at the time offered no details about the nature of the debris. The craft is believed to have imploded in the water, causing debris to land several hundred meters from the site of the Titanic. Coast Guard officials said that investigations into the episode would continue, but offered few details about their nature. The announcement from the Coast Guard came just minutes after OceanGate Exploration, the company that owned the Titan submersible and operates dives to the Titanic, issued a statement saying it believed the passengers were dead. In a statement Thursday, the company said, quote, "Our hearts are with these 5 souls and every member of their families during this tragic time." End of quote. The Titan, a 21-foot tourist submersible, lost contact with its Canadian-owned parent ship Polar Prince on Sunday morning, sparking a wide-reaching search led by the U.S. and Canadian Coast Guards that has garnered round-the-clock international attention. Commercial, research, and private vessels and aircraft, as well as teams from the U.S., Canada, and other countries, joined together to search a span of the North Atlantic over twice the size of Connecticut. The Coast Guard had estimated on Tuesday afternoon that the 5 passengers aboard the Titan had around 40 hours of oxygen if the craft was intact. It had been predicted that they would run out of oxygen sometime Thursday. As recently as Wednesday afternoon, American and Canadian officials were voicing confidence that the operation would remain a search and rescue mission. The Navy also dispatched the flyaway deep ocean salvage system called FDOS to Newfoundland in the event that the submersible was found. OceanGate Exploration successfully made trips to the shipwreck in 2021 and 2022, according to the company's website, which has now been taken down by the company. A Journey with OceanGate, the only company offering dives to the Titanic site, can cost a citizen scientist, in their words, a cool $250,000. So there you go, folks. That's what $250,000 will get you. A death trap 4,000 meters below the ocean surface. Concerns have been raised during the construction of the submersible. Experts were unsure whether the vessel, made of carbon fiber, could withstand continuous trips to the depths of the ocean floor and exposure to the intense pressure at the seafloor. The 5 people aboard were identified as 58-year-old Hamish Harding, a billionaire British explorer, 77-year-old Paul Henri Nargolet, a French Titanic expert, 48-year-old British businessman Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son Suleiman, and 61-year-old Stockton Rush, the founder and CEO of OceanGate Expeditions. Yeah, there's been a lot of controversy involved in this, so here's where the political part comes in. According to an employee who was fired by OceanGate, he said that he discovered that the clear portion of the hatch was only certified to 1,300 meters, not 4,000, which is where the Titanic lays. When he brought it up, he was fired. The submersible was controlled by a game controller, like a video game controller. Yeah, this is real cobbled together stuff, folks. You want my official opinion on that. So, how do I politicize this? This is the typical Republican dream. No regulations. This is what no regulations gets you. It gets you dead at 4,000 meters, 13,000 feet under the ocean surface. Dead, instant dead. This is what Republicans want for you. They don't want any businesses regulated. They want to be able to serve you rotten food, dirty water, chemicals in everything. They really do. They don't care about you. Republicans, and for that matter, a lot of the corporate Democrats, really just don't care about you. They don't. The sooner you figure that out, the better. Hey, I will say this. I'm not shedding any tears for the 5 people that were aboard that. Number one, they signed a release, apparently where the word death is mentioned 3 times on the first page alone. Second of all, this is a good way to eat the rich. Although the rich are eating each other at this rate, or the ocean's eating the rich. Hey, this sounds like a great idea. I thought sending him to space would be a good enough voyage for him, but yeah, I think this is better. I think this is a lot better. And a lot of people feel this way. And here's the thing. There's some people on Twitter that just really don't understand why most of us don't have sympathy for these folks. Journalist Brian Krasenstein posted this. This was before the debris field was found. As it appears that the passengers of the OceanGate Titan are likely out of oxygen, I want to bring up a few important points. 1, humans are human no matter their wealth. I see a lot of hate toward wealthy people, but also a lot less care toward the poor. 2, these people risk their lives for adventure. There is nothing wrong with that. Immigrants risk their lives just to live a normal life every day, yet often are looked down to, however. 3, every life is as valuable as any other. I don't agree with that at all. 4, hating people because of success is just as bad as hating people because of their lack of success or their differences. 5, be better. Well, I, of course, couldn't let that one go, so I had to write back to Brian and tell him how wrong he was. So somebody had brought up to Brian that rich people usually get rich by exploiting somebody else's labor. His response was, that's a broad statement. My response on the official Southpaws account was, but it's an accurate statement. Because it is. It is totally accurate. This is why I don't have sympathy for those people. I really don't. Like I said, I wish more would go. A lot more. Bon voyage. Right now, let's go to our next story. This was actually something on MSNBC that I want to take a look at and take a listen to. This is from Alex Witt's MSNBC show. She had as her guests Wall Street Journal reporter Deborah Acosta and Paul Butler, who's a law professor at Georgetown University Law Center. Now, they were talking about Donald Trump's arraignment. Acosta, who was in the courtroom, and she has some very interesting insight to this. So let's go ahead and play that clip.
Deborah, I'll start with you and get to the arraignment in just a minute. But I do want to ask you first about this new report from your colleague saying hours before Trump appeared at a Miami courthouse and pleaded not guilty, the chairman of Nevada's Republican Party walked into the federal trial court in Washington. What was that about?
Thank you so much, Alex, for having me on. Yeah, my colleagues Sadie Gurman and C. Ryan Barber report that they were seen at the Washington courthouse. And it's unclear if that particular federal probe is going to lead to an indictment. But just hours before, this was going on in Washington, D.C. And then here we are in this incredible historic moment in Miami, Donald Trump pleading not guilty to these incredible charges that are historic. And let me tell you a little bit about what it was like in that courtroom, because I did happen to be in that courtroom. Yeah.
Wait, let me just establish this, because you were sitting directly behind Secret Service, right? Jack Smith was there. You had, I understand, a really good view of Donald Trump. So take it from there and talk about his demeanor.
Yeah. If you see, do you see that hazy feminine blob in the background with the collared dress? That's actually me. I don't know how I got lucky enough to sit right there. But it was incredible because right when I walked in, the first thing I noticed was the Secret Service. They had a very aggressive, tense demeanor. I mean, one of them kept clenching his jaw repeatedly. They all furrowed their brows as we, the press, walked in. And honestly, I didn't even notice that Donald Trump was already seated in the courtroom until I sat down, got my bearings, looked around, and realized that Donald Trump was sitting just 2 rows in front of me. And actually, I was at an angle and was able to make out his profile as he looked over and whispered to his attorney. And so basically, he wasn't turning around that entire time. He didn't look at Jack Smith. He didn't look at any of the federal prosecutors. He was seated, looking forward the entire time. At times, he folded his arms in front of him. At one point, the most interesting thing I saw was when his aide, Walt Nauta, was signing the bond paperwork. He looked over at him and he closed his eyes for about 2 seconds and then blinked very slowly. And he repeated that like about 5 times, and while clenching his jaw really, really tightly.
Hang on a second. Did that feel like a message he was sending? Did he have something in his eye? I mean, what happened there?
I don't know. It was a sequence of events that was really interesting. He did it 5 times in a row. He wasn't looking back at anyone. It was just kind of like a moment that he was having. And I have to say, I've never seen that kind of expression on Donald Trump before. And I have to add that when he got up and turned to leave the courtroom, he was looking down at the ground and he was pressing his lips, pursing them tightly together. And then the corners of his mouth just dropped into the deepest frown I've ever seen on anyone in my entire life. And then he looked up at me and the other reporters around me, kind of with a bit of curiosity. I mean, this is the first time that he was looking anywhere in the courtroom behind him. And then he just kind of walked out, flanked by Secret Service. And I had a chance to speak with a former assistant U.S. attorney right before going into the courtroom about how this measures in history. And he happened to have been at the very first Senate hearing around Watergate. And he said that was kindergarten compared to this. This is much more serious because it deals with issues of national security.
Yeah. So I was really maybe that was not lost on Donald Trump, given the expressions you're describing. I mean, that would seem like a normal interpretation of that. Let me bring Paul into this conversation, though. This is absolutely fascinating what you're telling us, Deborah.
Oh, yes, it definitely is. It's very telling about Donald Trump's body language in the court. And to top that off, I have this story. This is Ken Meyer writing for Mediaite. This is dated June 14th. Donald Trump's former White House chief of staff assessed that Trump's blustery defiance throughout his arraignment day was a facade designed to mask his serious fear of the legal danger he faces. The Washington Post interviewed John Kelly about Trump's conduct Tuesday as Trump pleaded not guilty to 37 federal criminal charges stemming from his mishandling of classified documents. Even though Trump went through the day with his usual showmanship and projected strength in front of his supporters, Kelly wasn't buying his former boss's act. He told the Washington Post, quote, "He's scared shitless. This is the way he compensates for that. He gives people the appearance he doesn't care by doing this. For the first time in his life, it looks like he's being held accountable. Up until this point in his life, it's like, I'm not going to pay you. Take me to court. He's never been held accountable before." End of quote. Kelly has been one of the most prominent former members of the Trump administration to turn against him, sharing numerous unflattering details about him since his White House departure. Despite Trump's effort to maintain upbeat appearances in public, the Washington Post report corroborated other journalists who said that Trump looked quite downcast while he was still in the courtroom. The Washington Post also heard from former Trump press secretary Stephanie Grisham, who also commented on how Trump wants to keep his crowds cheering and his staffers want to keep Trump appeased before he gets angry. She said, quote, "It's part public relations and part babysitting. He wants people to see the cheering crowd so they don't think anything is going wrong. It's also because the staff around him want to keep him busy and wants to have people cheering for him and giving him the ego stroke that he'll need so they don't have to deal with him being completely pissed." End of quote. That's beautiful. I love this. And somebody else who's getting their day of reckoning, this is Jake Offenhartz writing for the Associated Press. This is dated June 22nd out of New York. The two people who bailed Representative George Santos out of federal custody have been revealed to be his father and his aunt, a detail the Republican fought to keep secret as he faces criminal charges and swirling questions about his finances. Garcino dos Santos Jr. and Elma Previn were named in a court filing Thursday as the co-signers of Santos's $500,000 bond, which enabled his release as he awaits trial on federal charges of fraud, money laundering, and theft of public funds. Congressman Santos, Republican of New York, had fought to keep their names secret. They were revealed after media organizations, including the Associated Press, petitioned the court for the records to be unsealed, citing the right of public access to court proceedings. In a court filing earlier this month, his attorney, Joseph Murray, said Santos would rather go to jail than subject his guarantors to the great harm that could come from public disclosure. Under the bond agreement, the co-signers did not have to pay any money up front, but would be held financially liable if Santos did not return to court. While the identities of signatories are normally made public, Murray pointed to the media frenzy and hateful attacks faced by Santos as a reason to make an exception. They're just having a media frenzy over this, and there's just so much hatred, and it could be harmful to his poor little relatives. Oh, darn, don't get in trouble then. Santos told reporters after his initial court appearance they would never get information about the source of his bail funds, claiming the media would, quote, harass them and make their life miserable, end of quote. But after the news organizations pushed for the filings to be made public, a federal judge denied Santos's request to keep the information secret. Santos appealed the decision, with his lawyer arguing that the co-signers should be given the opportunity to withdraw their support before the names are released. The appeal was denied Tuesday. On Thursday, Santos said on Twitter that he and his family had made peace with the decision to unseal the filing, adding, quote, "Now I pray that the judge is correct and no harm comes to them," end of quote. In a newly unsealed filing, Judge Joanna Siebert wrote Santos, quote, "did nothing to diffuse the media frenzy," end of quote, adding that his attempts to shield the names of his family members had, quote, simply created hysteria over what is in actuality a non-issue, end of quote. Both his aunt and father are New York residents who donated to Santos's political campaign. In campaign finance records, his father lists his occupation as a painter. Previn said she worked as a mail carrier. Attempts to reach them on Thursday were unsuccessful. Efforts by Santos to withhold their names from the public had fueled speculation and doubt, with some House Democrats suggesting that a financial supporter could be seeking to exert political influence on the congressman. Earlier this week, Representative Dan Goldman, Democrat of New York, and Representative Greg Landsman, Democrat of Ohio, introduced a resolution calling on the House Ethics Committee to disclose the names so they could determine whether Santos was in violation of congressional gifting rules. Santos pleaded not guilty on May 10th to a 13-count indictment charging that he duped donors, stole from his campaign, lied to Congress about being a millionaire, and cheated to collect unemployment benefits he didn't deserve. He has defied calls to resign while refusing to answer questions about the source of his wealth, including a $700,000 payment he made to his campaign. According to federal prosecutors, Santos vastly overstated his income and assets, falsely certifying that he earned a $750,000 salary from a consulting company known as the DeVolder Organization, LLC. If convicted, Santos could face up to 20 years in prison. He's due back in court June 30th. And not soon enough for me. Let them all get into trouble. I don't care. Let them all fall. All of them. And right now, we might as well go on to our next segment. Oh, yeah. Another episode of As Ottawa County Turns, right around the pike. And now, Hochter and Ramble present As Ottawa County Turns. Brought to you today by Dingle's Chips. Don't ask where they came from. I'll just tell you this. I opened up a can that I bought. It smelled awful. I wouldn't recommend them. One of the most awful products they've had so far. Oh, gosh. So let's go to our first story. This is Marissa Oberly writing for WXMI Television. This is dated June 20th out of West Olive. A handful of Ottawa County commissioners voiced criticism of Grand Haven's Pride Festival at a meeting on Tuesday. The festival, which was the city's first ever, happened last weekend. Commissioners spoke against some of the events held, including the festival's drag show, drag bingo, and a drag brunch, along with concerns that children saw what took place. The comments came during a Health and Human Services Committee meeting. Sylvia Rhodea, vice chairperson of the commission, said, quote, I know a lot of people don't like hearing the word grooming, but this truly is grooming, end of quote. Oh, really? Yeah, lady, not true. In addition to Rhodea, Commissioners Roger Belknap, Allison Miedema, and Rebecca Curran expressed concerns. During his comments, Belknap said he hopes Holland's Pride Festival, which is scheduled for this weekend, sets age limits on who can see the drag show. He said, quote, I would like to go on record saying I really hope we're intelligent enough not to make that an all-ages event. I understand risky behavior for adults, colleges, I understand that. But ladies and gentlemen, we're inviting our kids to participate in this and sanctioning it. End of quote. Fox 17 spoke to one of Grand Haven Pride's committee members, the Reverend Jared Kramer with St. John's Episcopal Church. He said he was happy to see around 4,000 people of all ages supporting LGBTQ plus rights during the event. Kramer said, quote, to paint all of this as something evil, harmful to children is wrong. It's a lie and it's an insult to these wonderful, amazing people who came out to celebrate for Pride. End of quote. By the way, the next scheduled Ottawa County Commission meeting is June 27th, so that's next Tuesday. I hope a lot of people come out and just give them hell. They deserve it. So we have a follow-up to that story. This is Joshua Albertus writing for WZZM. I'm going to skip a little bit here. Ottawa County Department of Public Health Officer Adeline Hambley, who is currently in court to defend her job, has responded to the criticisms that were just mentioned in the previous article. She said that such community outreach is her job. She said, quote, "It's important to understand that the health officer has statutory requirements, a responsibility, and a duty under the law to prevent disease and protect the health of the community." End of quote. The department's purpose at Pride events, she said, has been to distribute COVID vaccines, various testing, and Mpox vaccines, as Mpox waves in the last year have disproportionately affected the LGBTQ community. Hambley added, quote, "The health officer role and the Ottawa County Health Department is not political. It's science-based, medically based, fact-based. So we can serve everyone in the community and protect health, prevent disease, and keep our community healthy." End of quote. She added that being present in the community for all, including LGBTQ residents, falls directly into that mission. She said, quote, "These are members of our community. They're people in our community whose health and wellness matter, and that we're going to provide our services on equal platform as we do for any other members of our community that we serve." End of quote. Hambley said her department has also attended events for Juneteenth and local kindergarten roundups, among others, to also provide differing health supplies and education based on the audience. The department was in attendance at the Grand Haven Pride and is planning on being at Holland Pride on Saturday. And Ottawa County commissioners are walking a fine line, because now if you discriminate against LGBTQ plus people, you're in deep doo-doo with the state of Michigan, because they're now protected under the law equally. The Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act was expanded greatly. But of course, these right-wing, nut-job, evil, violent, conservative traitors don't care about anybody that's disadvantaged. They don't care about the LGBTQ community. They don't care about hungry children. You know what they care about? They care about a fetus. They care about their Republican rich buddies. And speaking of the Republican Party in Ottawa County, let's get to our next story. This is also from WXMI. The Ottawa County Republican Party has filed a resolution to censure Commissioner Jacob Bonema, quote, "for behavior unbecoming of a public servant and violating Republican values," end of quote. The resolution claims that Bonema undermined the GOP's principles by supporting pandemic-era mandates and advocating for the creation of a pandemic panel, voting 3 times against GOP-led proposals during a meeting on March 14th, and telling the Washington Post a Republican colleague is not afraid to hurt people. The resolution goes on to say Bonema filed a harassment complaint against Administrator John Gibbs with the county's Human Resources Director. Those claims reportedly included threats, misconduct, intimidation, and indecent conduct. The Ottawa County Republican Party says the HR director released a statement months later explaining the claims against Gibbs were deemed unfounded after an investigation took place. Well, we haven't seen it. This is the first time hearing about this. As a result of the resolution, Bonema is banned from voting during the next 6 committee meetings. Commissioner Doug Zylstra expressed his disdain for the censure on Twitter Wednesday, posting this, quote, "Disappointed to see my colleague Commissioner Bonema censured by the Ottawa GOP, in part because we have a good working relationship. Working across party lines should be a plus, not a motive for censure," end of quote. Bonema released this statement, quote, "I am a common-sense conservative who is known for being a rugged individualist and proud to represent the hard-working, honest individuals who value their liberty and freedom. My district includes Zeeland City, Zeeland Township, and parts of Holland Township. As commissioner, I have worked hard to listen to the people's voice and vote honestly and consistently with the values of this thriving county. I will continue to fight for common sense, conservative values and principles to be the standard by which we do the business of the county. I work for no political party or special interest group. I work for the people of Ottawa County. I am for government transparency through the First Amendment, competency with ideology, fiscal responsibility, limited government, governing with the least force and authority with grace, sanctity of life, honoring all people equally due to their individual intrinsic value and worth. Pro-Second Amendment. I am against medical mandates, limiting free speech, no-bid, non-cancelable contracts, wasteful spending, virtue signaling and activism, and groupthink. I was elected, as were others on the county commission, by the people who sought change, rational leadership, transparency in government, and assurance that Ottawa County would lead with the interests of the people first. We were elected to return trust in county government. It is my desire to rebuild that trust in our elected officials by advocating for transparency, fiscal responsibility, and good governance. I am committed to continuing this work, and I will always strive to put the interest of our district first. From fighting for lower taxes to advocating for small businesses, I will work tirelessly to uphold the values that have made District 4 a great place to live and work. The Ottawa GOP censure simply limits my participation at county-level GOP Executive Committee meetings and will have no impact on my commitments or voting as a commissioner. I pray the Ottawa GOP establishment can return to its conservative roots and its primary purpose, so we can get back to supporting winning candidates like me and winning future elections. End of quote. So there you go. That's Commissioner Jacob Bonema in response to being censured by the county Republican Party. So the people of Ottawa County wanted transparency, rational leadership, lead with the interests of the people. If you think they got that, here's what they really think. Didn't happen. So there you go, folks. And that's our final story. So with that, let's go ahead and get on out of here. We'll be back for another episode next week. Maybe. Join us again soon for another edition of As Ottawa County Turns. This program is produced for Big D Entertainment. Stay tuned for The Edge of Blight over most of these stations. I keep missing The Edge of Blight. I really need to watch that sometime just to see what it's like. Oh, I love it. The Edge of Blight. All right, and we're on the edge of something else.
Stop! Hammer time!
Oh, yeah, it's time for our next segment. It's hammer time. It is time to drop the hammer on the douchebag of the week. We've got 2 winners for you this week, so every time we have 2 winners, Wade Garrett chimes in.
The double douche.
Who is that guy?
Gentlemen, Wade Garrett.
Holy sh**.
Exactly right.
And winner number 1 this week, one of my former employers, Wood Television. I have this story. This is Frank Witzel writing for the Detroit Free Press. This is dated June 15th. We've talked about LGBTQ and Pride. Of course, June is Pride Month. Well, Wood TV doesn't want a lot of Pride coverage, or at least management doesn't. And I can tell you why. We'll get into the story right now, though. A Grand Rapids TV station is facing public and employee criticism for telling reporters to cover fewer LGBTQ plus events during Pride Month because it said it has been upsetting conservative viewers. Employees said a Wood TV memo, which the Free Press has obtained, was sent to them Tuesday and asked staff to, quote, do some work to discern the newsworthiness, end of quote, of Pride events. The memo continued, quote, we know that West Michigan is a conservative area in many ways. We need to recognize that some stories related to LGBTQ issues are going to be controversial and polarizing in our community, end of quote. You know what that is? That's called censorship by somebody way up top. The Detroit Free Press left messages with the station's news director and assistant news director. I would love to get a hold of that memo and see who wrote it. I hope if somebody, I tell you what, I still have a few friends at Wood TV. If you want to send that memo to me, it's real easy. Just send it to southpawsradio@gmail.com. I will get it. By Thursday evening, Gary Whiteman, the executive vice president of Nexstar Media Group in Texas, which owns Wood TV, released a statement apologizing, quote, for offending members of the LGBTQ community and Wood TV's viewers, end of quote, and pledging to, quote, take appropriate action as necessary to address this situation, end of quote. He said the company is looking into the situation and, quote, the communication regarding the station's coverage of Pride Month activities in the area is not consistent with Nexstar's values, the way we cover the news, or the respect we have for our viewers, end of quote. He added this, quote, diversity, equity, and inclusion are among Nexstar's core values. Our local TV stations are expected to cover and report the news of the day in an expansive and inclusive fashion consistent with these values, end of quote. Wood TV has an editorial content sharing relationship with the Holland Sentinel, which, along with the Detroit Free Press and other Michigan news outlets, is owned by Gannett. Pride Month, an annual celebration for LGBTQ plus Americans, has become a challenge for businesses. They face increasingly divided and vocal opinions on whether to support or oppose events in the nation's current political climate. Some local and state officials have voted to ban pride flags and other displays from public property and prevent teachers from discussing sexual orientation and gender identity. Florida passed a bill which some opponents have called Don't Say Gay, which bans teachers from having discussions about sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through third grade. Critics of the law included the entertainment behemoth Disney. On Monday, according to the Livingston Daily newspaper, the Heartland Consolidated Schools Board of Education narrowly passed a policy change that restricts what kind of signs, posters, flags, stickers, and other items can be displayed in school buildings. The Hamtramck City Council voted unanimously Tuesday night to ban LGBTQ plus pride flags from being displayed on all city properties after 3 hours of public comment and months of intense debate, setting the stage for political clashes representing diverging views about the city's future. Yeah, it's also going to spark a lawsuit. I got news for you. You're violating Elliot Larson. Period. End of story. Dana Nessel, the Attorney General, will tell you this. Last month, Target moved pride displays and merchandise away from the entrances of some stores, saying the decision to adjust its plans was to protect workers under volatile circumstances after some customers screamed at employees and threatened to boycott the stores. That is according to multiple news reports. And Anheuser-Busch is facing fallout after a marketing campaign with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney. And now they're facing fallout because they've backed off of Dylan Mulvaney. Now members of the LGBTQ community are boycotting Anheuser-Busch. So AB is getting it from both ends. And this is just great. It really is. You know, if you want to make conservatives sober, just put a pride flag on alcohol. As for Wood Television, the news station suggested its reporters need not cover every Pride event. The station added in the memo, quote, if we are covering Pride events, we need to consider how to make the story balanced and get both sides of the issue, end of quote. Oh, really? That's not the job of the press. It's not covering both sides. You cover the truth. You cover what's happening. It's not one person saying it's raining outside and another person saying it's not raining outside, and the reporter gets both sides of the story. It's the reporter's job to stick his head out the window and see if raindrops are hitting his head. The memo also said, quote, we have also started to hear pushback from viewers who are not happy to see those pride-related stories, end of quote. Adding that, quote, while you personally may not agree with a certain position, people are entitled to their opinions and they are our viewers, end of quote. Let me just tell you who those viewers are. Dick and Betsy DeVos, because they've got a stranglehold on media in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They really do. And I'll say that right here, right now. Plain and simple, period, end of story. The influence exerted by the DeVos family. Before that, the Secchias, the Van Andels, the Myers, and all the other rich people in lovely little River City, they exert a lot of influence on the media. You know what I should do? I should have Jack Prince come on. I don't know if he's told this story on air, but I should have him on the air to tell you this story about a car deal that he had with a dealership that is no longer operating in Grand Rapids, and I'll say the name of the dealership, Orson E. Co. They used to be a Pontiac dealer. He had a deal with them where he traded a car in, and they never paid the car off. He kept getting requests from the bank. Oh, you need to make a payment. And he's like, I traded the car into Orson Co. They're supposed to pay it off. And it took several months. And Jack contacted my old buddy Henry Erb at Wood TV, the investigative reporter who's been there 50 years, literally 50 years. And Henry started to do a deep investigation on Orson Co. Well, what happened was Henry contacted Jack and said, I have to kill the story. I've been told by my superiors I have to kill the story because Orson Co. Pontiac is an advertiser at Wood TV. Even though they were a bunch of crooks, my opinion, not paying off car loans for people that traded their cars. Although I will say that Jack did get the loan finally paid off. Upper management exerting force on the newsroom has been around for a long time. There's a great article that was published over 30 years ago in Grand Rapids Magazine by former WZZM investigative reporter Mark Lagerquist about what was happening behind the scenes at WZZM when Bob Price, Price Communications, who I hope Bob Price is burning in hell if there is such a place. He bought the station. He was a junk bond person. That's how he made his money, junk bonds. He decided to buy a TV station. The first thing he did is he started gutting the entire news department. Mark left. He ended up firing Cynthia Kay, who was my instructor at Grand Valley, and they almost fired Jim Rixey, who was another one of my part-time instructors at Grand Valley. I have the article somewhere. I have the magazine somewhere. It was a 2-part article that covered 2 different months of Grand Rapids Magazine. And I knew this 30 years ago. I actually wrote my senior thesis in college about what was happening with the consolidation of media, because I saw the handwriting on the wall, and I was right then. Let me continue. Some Wood TV employees have taken to Twitter to voice their concerns. Wood TV executive producer Luke Steyer posted on Twitter, quote, "This memo was met with immediate pushback from our newsroom. The guidance is not being followed. The only 2 people involved in its creation have been removed from any discussions surrounding Wood TV Pride coverage as our corporation conducts a thorough investigation." End of quote. Another Wood TV employee also posted to Twitter, quote, "It has been an awfully difficult week for our newsroom. The silver lining in this mess is that our staff is united in pushing back on this ridiculous and hurtful memo that was sent out." End of quote. That employee is a producer. So winner number 1, Wood Television. Winner number 2, Texas Governor Greg Abbott. I have this story. This is Sarah Bobolts writing for the Huffington Post. This is dated June 17th. As his state faced a dangerous heat wave this week, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a broad new law that will nullify a wide range of local regulations, including mandated water breaks for construction workers beginning September 1st. That's according to an article published by the Texas Tribune newspaper. The new Republican-backed law strips the ability of local municipalities to enact certain regulations in favor of state authority, ostensibly to, quote, provide statewide consistency, end of quote. It covers a wide range, including other worker protections, environmental protections, housing protections, and more. Television station KHOU reported that critics dubbed the bill the Death Star Bill. The president of the NAACP's Houston chapter, Bishop James Dixon, called it, quote, a threat to civil rights and human rights, end of quote. Among the supporters of the bill included several construction business associations. Yeah, because they'd like to pay the cheapest dollar work people 12 hours with no breaks, no lunch, and not pay them a working wage? Of course, the construction business associations would be against it. Dallas and Austin currently require workers to be given at least 10 minutes to cool down and hydrate every 4 hours. Abbott signed the legislation last Tuesday. On Thursday and Friday, some areas of the state began setting new heat records, and others are expected to chart new highs as temperatures soar into triple digits over the next several days. Millions of people around the Houston region were issued an excessive heat warning on Friday, lasting through Sunday, with feels-like temperatures potentially hitting 120 degrees. The National Weather Service also said that southern Texas and eastern Louisiana are at an increased risk of fires due to the heat, which will strain the state's brittle power grid. Average temperatures in Texas have been rising for decades. Texas is already the top state for worker deaths due to heat. That's according to the Texas Tribune. They also reported that heat-related deaths hit a 2-decade high just last year, when at least 279 people across Texas died by heat. Republicans don't care about you. I really don't know how many times I got to repeat it before it sinks in. Republican legislators, Republicans in general, don't give a fuck about you. Period. End of story. So to Wood Television and Texas Governor Greg Abbott, we have this message for you.
Don't be a douchebag.
Oh yeah, you got that right. I wish Greg Abbott would roll off into the sunset, hopefully toward a desert. Leave him dehydrated, see how he likes it. Speaking of evil, violent conservatives, let's go to our next story. This was published by The Guardian. Kyra Lerner wrote this on June 9th. 2.5 years after the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, an estimated 12 million American adults, 4.4% of the adult population, believe violence is justified to restore Donald Trump to the White House. Those are 12 million American adults who should be locked up and the key thrown away. I'll say it right here, right now. I don't care. Lock them all up. All of them. They're all violent. Every single one of them. Though the number of adults who believe this has declined since the insurrection, recent survey data from the University of Chicago reveal alarming and dangerous levels of support for political violence and conspiracy theories across the United States. Yeah, because the two go hand in hand. They're two peas in a pod. They're like peanut butter and jelly. The university's Chicago Project on Security Threats Research Center, called CPOST, has been conducting dangers to democracy surveys of American adults on political violence and attitudes toward democracy since shortly after the January 6th attacks. In new data from April shared exclusively with The Guardian, researchers found a continued support for violence to achieve various political goals on both sides of the aisle and a general distrust for democracy. The results are particularly alarming as the 2024 election approaches without essential safeguards that some lawmakers say could help prevent another violent attack on U.S. democracy. For the next year and a half through the 2024 election, CPOST will be releasing new survey data tracking continued dangers to democracy every 3 months. The data will be published first with The Guardian. This data will be critical at a time when efforts to erode democracy feel increasingly prevalent in the United States, from candidates who deny the results of their elections to governmental task forces attempting to prosecute people who unintentionally violate voting laws. Robert Pape, a professor at the University of Chicago who directs CPOST, said, quote, "We're heading into an extremely tumultuous election season. What's happening in the United States is political violence is going from the fringe to the mainstream." End of quote. The most recent survey from April 2023 found that an estimated 142 million Americans believe that elections won't solve America's most fundamental problems. That's up from 111 million last September. 1 in 5 American adults still believe that the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump. That represents very little change from 2021. Pape said, quote, What you're seeing is really disturbing levels of distrust in American democracy, support for dangerous conspiracy theories, and support for political violence itself. End of quote. Pape said it was important to track sentiments about political violence, comparing it to the kindling for wildfire. Though many were unaware that the events of January 6 would turn violent, research shows that public support for violence was widespread, so the attacks themselves should not have come as a surprise. Pape added, quote, "Once you have support for violence in the mainstream, those are the raw ingredients or the raw combustible material, and then speeches, typically by politicians, can set them off. Or if they get going, speeches can encourage them to go further." End of quote. Before the January 6th traitorous insurrection, I added the word traitorous, there was chatter on online forums and among far-right groups about potential political violence when Congress met to count electoral votes and certify Joe Biden the winner of the presidential election. Pape said that it was Trump's speech at the White House ellipse that day that touched off the actual violence. That's why it's important to track public sentiment about political violence regularly. The instigating event, usually a speech or comment by a person in power, is unpredictable and can set people off at any moment, but the underlying support for violence is more predictable and trackable. The survey found that almost 14%, a minority of Americans, but still a significant number, believe the use of force is justified to achieve political goals that they support. More specifically, 12.4% believe it's justified to restore the federal right to abortion. 8.4% believe it's justified to ensure members of Congress and other government officials do the right thing. 6.3% think it's justified to preserve the rights of white Americans. 6.1% believe it's justified to prevent the prosecution of Donald Trump. 12.4% to restore abortion? I can get behind that. Absolutely. Peter Feaver, a political science professor at Duke University and the author of a forthcoming book on public trust in the military, said that while public support for political violence might seem extreme, a confluence of factors is necessary for actual violence to occur, which is still rare. On January 6th, there was a time-sensitive action, an already existing rally, and inciters, including Trump, who encouraged others to commit violence. Feaver said, quote, "You needed all of that at the same time to turn what would have been latent sentiment of the sort that this survey captures into actual violence." End of quote. In addition to wide support for Trump's big lie about the 2020 election, the survey also found that significant numbers of American adults believe conspiracy theories about the U.S. government, and the number of believers has remained steady over almost 2 years. For example, 10% of American adults in April said they believe the government is run by Satan-worshiping pedophiles. They're called Republicans, folks. Feaver said, quote, "The survey confirms what we already knew, which is that rhetoric is really hyperbolic in American political life. You can get folks to express support for pretty extreme statements." End of quote. An even greater percentage of American adults said they believe in the Great Replacement Theory, a white nationalist conspiracy theory that holds there is an active effort to replace white people with non-white populations, including immigrants and other people of color, in white majority countries. While much of the survey reveals an alarming level of political polarization in the United States, there are areas where the majority of people do agree. Almost 55% of American adults feel like elections won't solve our most fundamental political and social problems. Close to 50% believe political elites on both sides of the aisle are the most corrupt people in America. Perhaps more optimistically, the largest share of Americans believe in a potential solution to political violence. More than 77% think Republicans and Democrats in Congress should make a joint statement condemning any political violence. Pape said, quote, "There's a tremendous amount of opposition to political violence in the United States, but it is not mobilized." End of quote. And that story gets me to something that I wanted to bring up. So on my personal Facebook, I posted a meme that was shared by a listener of mine. This was a meme featuring Yale historian Timothy Snyder, who accurately predicted Trump's insurrection. He's making a startling new prediction. He said this, quote, "We're looking almost certainly at a Republican attempt in 2024 to take power without winning the election," end of quote. He warns that Republican-controlled state legislatures will suppress black votes and give the legislatures control over casting electoral votes in 2024 too, even if they lose by 10 million votes, quote, "still appoint the president of their choosing," end of quote. He added that while most coup attempts fail, quote, "a failed coup is practice for a successful coup," end of quote. So a longtime friend of mine, Carrie, responded to me, and she is usually pretty progressive, but not this time. Here's her response to that meme. She said, quote, "Honestly, Republicans are usually way more democratic and trustworthy when it comes to elections. Did the government let January 6th happen? Yep. But I don't think democracy was ever actually in jeopardy." So I responded to Carrie by saying this. "It's really disappointing to see this first thing in the morning. Republicans are the party of voter suppression, beyond doubt, from purposefully running negative advertising to keep voters home to removing ballot boxes, from passing legislation to limit early and absentee voting to making it harder for Black, Indigenous, and people of color voters to cast a ballot. Republicans have proven themselves to be the grand champions of actual election interference. Far and away the grand champions. 'Cause it's the truth. Do I have to go through the stories? Next week on the show, we'll talk about California Representative Adam Schiff being censured in the House because of his investigation into Donald Trump. This is all politically motivated, and I'm going to rake the Republican Party over the coals next week. You won't want to miss it. But let's go ahead and finish with an off-the-cuff segment. This is the Associated Press out of Atlanta. The owner of an auto repair shop who paid a former employee with 91,500 oily pennies has been ordered by a judge to pay nearly $4 million more cents. A federal judge ruled that Miles Walker, who owns A-OK Walker Auto Works in Peachtree City, Georgia, owes $39,934 to 9 workers for unpaid overtime and damages. Attorneys for Walker agreed to the payments to settle a civil lawsuit brought by the U.S. Labor Department that accused Walker of retaliating against former employee Andreas Flatten in 2021. After Flatten filed a complaint with the agency saying Walker owed him a final $915 paycheck, the employer dumped that amount in oil-covered pennies in Flatten's driveway. The mountain of loose change came with a pay stub signed with an expletive. The Labor Department said further investigation found that Walker's business had also violated overtime provisions of the Federal Fair Standards and Labor Act. On June 16th, the judge signed a consent order in which Walker agreed to pay nearly $8,700 more to Flatten in owed overtime and damages. 8 other workers are to receive amounts between $14,640 and $513 within the next year. Walker's attorney, Ryan Farmer, said the conflict with Flatten doesn't reflect his client's, quote, true character as a businessman, end of quote. In an emailed statement to the Associated Press Tuesday, Farmer said, quote, Mr. Walker is like many other small business owners in America. He wakes up every day doing everything he can to put food on the table. Unfortunately, emotionally charged decisions can come back and bite you in the rear end, end of quote. Well, I guess they did for sure on that one. Folks, we're out of time for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.